Here we go. All right. Well, welcome, Victor. Thanks so much for joining me tonight to talk about the new 2020 Scrum Guide that came out today. At the same point in time that Scrum is celebrating its 25th anniversary. Can you imagine that?
There's a new Scrum Guide?
Oh, no. Yes. You didn't read it. I thought you even... Did you attend some sort of...
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Did you attend some sort of... event when they released the guide? Yeah
there was a live event this morning, 7 a.m. my time on the West Coast, but East Coast it was 10 a.m. and it was going worldwide. Thousands of people were attending. Wow. I missed a little bit of Jeff and Ken together again.
Oh, really?
Kicking it off, and then there were sessions, but I soldiered through the whole thing. It was interesting. A lot of good discussion on what was in there. And then Jeff came on at the very end and he took some questions and he answered some attendee questions, which is very nice.
So what was your main takeaway, or a couple of three main takeaways from it all?
So top of my mind is that the Scrum Guide slimmed down from 19 pages to 13 pages. Meaning at least something can lose weight during this pandemic.
You know, I've been losing a little bit of weight too because I'm not traveling anymore. So it slimmed down from 16 to 12 pages. I noticed that one of the things in the beginning is recognizing that Scrum comes from lean thinking. I've always insisted that Agile is born out of lean, and it's nice to see that they're recognizing that. Oh, you grab it.
Looking back to our Harvard Business Review with Nanoka and Takeuchi, they talk all about lean when they introduced the term Scrum that very first time that inspired Jeff. And it's funny because as much as they talked about lean back in the day, the term lean never really made it into any of the prior Scrum guides that I'm aware of.
Exactly. I was doing a little compare and contrast myself and didn't see anything about lean in the last one. So it's funny, they leaned out the Scrum guide and added lean to it. One of the things I noticed though is they are saying lean thinking is about eliminating waste. And I do know some people in the lean community say, lean thinking is so much more than just that. And I guess in the spirit of keeping it lightweight, they just wanted to make sure, hey, eliminate the waste. And I'd really wonder if people understand that means eliminate wasteful activities that do not support customer value. There's a lot about stakeholders in the guide. I also didn't really see anything about customers and users. It's all about stakeholders. Who would you, when you hear that term stakeholder, what do you think of?
Well, I know that you like to think of vampires because I've been to your CSM class.
Right, holding the stake. Or I also talk about developers being the stake pounders, but
when I hear stakeholders, usually I have the terminology customer and user to fall back on and include with stakeholders. So stakeholder for me kind of implies an internal to the organization person. But a stakeholder certainly can be an end user, could be a customer, could be the person who buys your product. Usually, though, when I do my classes, I say stakeholders are, I include them in the internal group, like senior managers, other team members on other teams.
Oh, yeah.
Whoever it might be.
Yeah, I got you.
Someone who has a stake in it, yeah.
Right. I feel this similarly. I think about special stakeholders like the sponsor, and these days distinguishing and saying internal versus external stakeholder, because so many people do have a stake in the game that are interested in the outcome, and hopefully that does include our users and customers.
Yeah. Hey, before we leave the topic of lean, the Poppendieck's book is the one that I always go to when I'm kind of trying to find any parallels or any applications of lean to software. This is a good place to start. But I wanted to ask you if you had any other resources that people can look at to find out more about lean.
Well,
again,
I don't have
we're not only in the software world, but
right. I don't have a big bookshelf here, but I just happen to have right over here Lean Product Development. Well, there it is. Lean Product Development Flow. By Don Reinertsen, and I really appreciate that book. I like the Lean Applied. I forget exactly the name of it from Mary and Tom Popendick too, and I really like this one. But you have to be into math. It's got tons of math.
Pretty heavy on queuing theory and a lot of
graphs. You get graphs.
First written. Yeah. Pulls a lot of that in there.
Yeah. But I always recommend this book, and I took a class with Reinertsen and asked him, look, there's 100 and some odd principles in here. I can hardly wrap my head around the 12 of Agile. Tell me, Don, what should I really take away from this book? And he said, if nothing else, build an economic model and compute your cost of delay. Cost of delay seems to be the big thing coming out of that book.
Yeah.
And I think talk a lot about product ownership and product owners understanding balance sheets and coming up with an economic model, and understanding cost of delay helps with those priorities.
Yeah, and it helps if you're, exactly, priorities. Prioritization is what I was going to say, but you already hit it. So
all right,
nice.
Prioritize, stack rank, that is. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the new Scrum guide. I also noticed now they talk about product goal. And what exactly is that? Did they talk about that at all today?
For me, and I'd have to go back and watch it. They did post the video up there again. I didn't hear them attach the word vision to it. But for me, when I think product goal, I'm thinking of a vision, right? I'm thinking that the product backlog has a component to it that is its commitment, or its attribute, they call it.
Okay.
And that's the product goal. To me, that's another way of saying vision. That's kind of my shorthand I'm going with until I start getting more and more into the Scrum Guide, having more of these types of conversations.
Okay. Yeah. I read it and I took some notes on it, and it got a little confusing to me, because they say a product should have one goal, and that goal should be addressed before there's another product goal. And I think about in here maybe outcomes, outcomes over output, and that whole mantra from Jeff Patton and that crew. And there, an outcome is really some sort of releasable event, something that goes into the product, into production, and then there might be another outcome, some other thing that we focus on. And one of the challenges I think might happen with this idea of product goal is a product backlog will start to have these product goals, like more than one in it. And I agree with you. It should be vision, strategy, somewhere in that range, and not this is what we're now going to release. And that also confused me. At the end of the guide, they talk about when a product backlog item is done, hits the definition of done, then that that's kind of into that product goal, and something that can add into a product increment. So all of a sudden, a product backlog item is a product increment, and we can have several product increments collected together in a sprint. I don't know. I'm a little challenged by some of that language in there right now.
It's going to take some getting used to, for sure. But for me, I see it as the product backlog has the product goal as its attribute or commitment. I think they I'm not sure which word they use there.
Right.
And then the sprint backlog has the sprint goal, which we're familiar with, we've been using. And then the increment has the definition of done as its attribute. Yeah. So it's nice that they're all coupled, those three. Mm-hmm. But like you said, I think it's going to take some getting used to.
Yep.
See how it works out.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, because one of my first notes was, can a product have several goals? I understand the serialization of them. And then are people going to map these goals into their roadmap? I can see some unintended consequences of that language. I am enjoying, though, the language around the single Scrum team, and that everybody is a developer, and that if you're really engaged in Scrum, that might also be you. Something like that in the top of the Scrum guide. I thought that was pretty cool.
So you and I both are certified Scrum trainers with the Scrum Alliance, and as Ken and Jeff were working through this revision, they shared their early drafts with an audience of trainers and other people, other stakeholders, to use your term, not only Scrum Alliance, Scrum.org, and others. So I'd seen the elimination of the development team role in advance, and it still hasn't really set with me, the idea of developers, until today. Oh. Now, having heard some of the topics earlier today, just in general terms, I'm feeling better about the idea of developers on a team. It means you can have a tester, you can have a front-end person, you can have anyone else who's developing a product, and it doesn't have to be software. It could be in pharmaceuticals, it could be in automotives, whatever it is. People who are developing the product, developing what's going to be released, whether it's a hard product you can have in your hand, or a service, or something even more abstract. The idea that if you're creating toward that product, you're a developer, doesn't mean you're a software developer.
Yeah, see, now I've been fine with this for years, because I really started with extreme programming, and they are trying to take that term programmer back, and in XP, everybody on the team is a programmer. I'm fine with developer. I do think there is a little bit of, with that language, we start with front-end, back-end developers and that sort of thing. People might say, oh, we only need that actual title, developer, on our team. And then I was also noticing that and I love this, by the way, that if a product owner or Scrum Master has work in the sprint backlog, they too are developers. And
yes,
right. I've always thought there was a bit of a dysfunction almost wired into the Scrum construct of product owner, development team, and stay in your lane. But now they're really talking about, now they're talking about Scrum team. I didn't see, and I'm wondering if you know, can a developer then be a Scrum Master? So we have a person as a Scrum Master. If they take on work, they're also a developer. Does it work the other way around?
I don't believe it says. However, in Jeff's final words, as he was doing his Q&A at the end, he related a story about on a team that he'd worked on. It was a small team. It was very specialized, where the product owner was also working as a Scrum Master, and it worked. It's not. I know it's not the question you asked, but it's something that he observed, and he and Ken, when they were putting it together, really kind of they took the roles out. There is no role of Scrum Master, role of product owner now. As you said, it's more taking those arbitrary divisions away. Now we're all a Scrum team with the different, what do they call them? Capabilities, or no, they called them something else.
You know, I have
it in my notes here somewhere,
and I have it. I'm going to lose you for a second, Victor. You're still around. We'll hear you, but I'm gonna do this. And over here, got the Scrum guide going, and right. So we have the Scrum team with developers, product owners, Scrum Master. So these are not considered roles anymore. Is that what you're saying?
That was my takeaway from listening to them today. Was they're not necessarily roles anymore. They're accountabilities.
Interesting. Yeah,
so someone on the Scrum team, namely the Scrum Master, has the accountabilities of being the Scrum Master. I'm reading also on the Scrum guide, they have a revisions page, and they tell you what the differences are between each of the revisions. And you can go back to the 2010, 2009 versions of the Scrum Guide. But in this latest one, they say it's one team focused on one product. And it says the goal was to eliminate the concept of a separate team within a team that has led to a proxy or an us versus them behavior.
Perfect.
The PO and the dev team. Now they say there's just one Scrum team focused on the same objective with 3 different accountabilities: product ownership, Scrum Master, and developers.
I love that, actually, because I somewhat lampooned that, because in the last guide it says there is one team, the Scrum team. It consisted of product owner, Scrum Master, and development team, and there's no sub teams. Well, they just did that. They distinguished between Scrum team and development team. So seeing it the team level is Scrum and trying to eliminate that othering between product owner and the developers, I think, is wonderful. So there's one product owner, one Scrum Master. I'm still a little confused. Could I be an actual hands-on keyboard developer and own the product as well, and be and have those responsibilities? So,
I don't see why not. I mean, it doesn't say in the Scrum Guide. In fact, it's much less prescriptive across the board, the Scrum Guide. So I think that opens it up to possibilities for making it what you need it to be. And that's another thing that they said, was that this Scrum Guide is just that. It's made by the development team, or rather the Scrum team takes the Scrum Guide and then creates their own version of Scrum from the Scrum Guide.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah. Trying to remember. I wrote some quotes down, but my notes are hard to read right now.
Yeah, I understand.
Hey, there's no more estimate either. They got rid of estimate.
They did talk about sizing, which I thought was interesting. That they're really starting to pull in a little bit more of the extreme programming and user stories and story points. I get you with notes, by the way. My notes, I don't know, I can't read any of that stuff. All right. Well, another thing that I noticed is previously they talked about one small Scrum team of 5 to 9 people. Now they say there can be upwards of 10 on the team. And then if you have more than that, to make multiple teams, however, with one product owner.
One product backlog, one common product, and as you said, one product owner. I love that. Yeah, so that answers kind of a lot of ambiguous questions that I get in classes all the time. People are wondering, well, how many teams can a product owner work on?
Yeah.
And now it's pretty clear. It says, how many products do you have?
Exactly. It does require then defining product, which I thought was interesting. In the guide, it talks about a product can be a service as well as other things. So I guess they're...
And again, that goes to opening it up, so it's not just software focused anymore. They're kind of opening it to allow for better conversations when you're talking about Scrum in the workplace. It doesn't have to be a software workplace anymore. It could be a marketing workplace. It could be a financial services workplace or other services. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, I agree. I think it means that a Scrum team or several teams working with one product owner, one product backlog, better get pretty clear about even what product is before even figuring out how to create these different teams and whatever else. And I can see service as a product. It can be an enabler for an endpoint product or something like that. But I think we're going to have some work in front of us as trainers and coaches to help organizations and teams figure out what is your product. We're going to have to be much more careful defining that.
What do you think about the idea of the sprint planning? Used to have 2 parts, right? What are we going to do? How are we going to do it?
Yeah.
And now they include the why. What are we going to do? Why are we doing it? And how are we going to do it?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that because I think that the idea of the sprint goal is not very well understood and hardly ever used. And so by elevating the idea of why, we might get a little bit further into that aspect.
Sorry, I got
You getting a little
fire
warm
got
there?
too hot.
Just get fired up, get a little warm there. Bob Boyle also says, I believe the lines between roles should be blurred. What's your Pink Floyd? Your shirt cracks me up. That's pretty funny. Oh my gosh.
Why not?
Why not?
Blurring the lines between what were typically roles. Yeah, I think it kind of gets rid of the hierarchy. It brings everyone kind of on a similar level. Anytime you can, again, going back to that us and them. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It's more collaboration. It's more transparent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. I wonder if anybody has anything to say on our chat channel. Let's see. I'll go back here again for a second.
Your comments down below. Use the chat and let us know.
Oh my gosh, it rhymes. It must be true. If something rhymes, it's by default true. And we can also go back over here. And yeah, we've got the chat window from, how do I do this? Oh, well, just right over your face. There's Bob's chat. All right. I don't see anything in the YouTube chat window. And welcome if anybody has joined us on the live stream. Thanks for showing up today. We're talking about the Scrum Guide. Victor Bonacci and Aaron Sanders here. And a little behind the scenes, it looks like, Victor. I also noticed they removed the term servant leader. They talk about Scrum Master as leader.
So I heard them with their rationalization. Jeff actually was given the rationalization about why, or maybe it was one of the other panelists. But that's something that I'm going to have a hard time with, because I really like the idea of servant leadership. I think Robert Greenleaf and anything that you might read or research about servant leadership is very useful to the mindset of being a leader, whether you call it the true leader or a Scrum Master or a coach or whatever inside of an organization that's using Scrum. But for me, like I said, I'm going to have a hard time ditching that word, especially if we use the term true leader, which is what they're saying now. Now, Jeff, what he said was we took the term servant leader and it was potentially being abused, is what they've said, how a lot of Scrum Masters were, say, for example, just like cleric,
taking notes,
scribes, just writing things down, taking notes for their team, just purely serving without leading. So he said we wanted to switch it and make it so that the leadership aspect comes first. So again, that'll take a little bit more digging into on my part for understanding, but on all of our part, we should be talking about it, having conversations about what does that mean? What are some examples that maybe we can pull in to start using when we talk about that idea of leadership?
Yeah, sure.
What do you think?
I like it. I mean, I think the more leaders we have in an organization, the better that we'll do. People that are willing to actually get out in front of it and take a risk and lead, which is certainly different from managing and certainly different from being in service. I do also like the idea of being in service to the team as a Scrum Master. Of course, during the I don't know what, 3 months ago, there was some chatter on our trainer and coaches group around, is the term servant leader racist because of that servant part of it. And I think Scrum Alliance or some people were contacted by BIPOC saying, we'd really like you to get rid of that. And even things like Scrum Master, product owner can have some, can trigger some people. And I'm fine with all of that. But I started to dig in to where, you're pointing at your Pink Floyd. I, I, I did start to dig into where did this come from, servant leadership, and Robert K. Greenleaf coming up with that term. And I realized it came from Hermann Hesse's book, Journey to the East, a fictional novel of some characters. And he synthesized character attributes and came up with the attributes of servant leadership based on that novel. So I don't know. I like more scientific, more of a scientific, empirical based approach to the things that we decide to bring in and talk about as part of Scrum and lean thinking and all of that. So I think I'm okay. There's just so much debate around it anyway. I think I'm okay with getting rid of the servant part of servant leader and just be a leader. If everybody on the team was a leader, I'd be super happy with that.
Good. That's a good way to approach it. Yeah. One thing that they said, and this is in the beginning when Jeff and Ken were both there together, is they said that Scrum hasn't changed. This is, I think Jeff said this. Scrum hasn't changed. We're just getting better at describing it. So we're trying to iterate on the description of Scrum, which is why this revision is smaller, more concise, maybe a little bit more readable than prior versions of the Scrum Guide.
I see. So they're refining and trying to take away a bit of the prescription, I think is what I'm taking away from what you were just saying. Yeah. I think I like that.
And so I think servant leader probably falls into that category.
Yeah, it adds a little bit too much noise, and then we have to unpack the term and talk a lot about it. So tell you what, hey, Scrum Master, just be a leader and stop, assigning work to people and, like, oh, here, let me just write those tasks and those stories down for you. I've got it, right? Like, I'm a leader. You do it. You lead too. Yeah.
Reminds me of the Dr. Pepper commercial. I'm a pepper, you're a pepper, you're a leader,
That's right.
He's a leader. Wouldn't you like to be a leader?
Yes,
too?
I would actually. Yeah, because leaders make decisions, right? And have a lot more control over themselves and their destiny.
Yeah, the destiny of the team. Perfect.
Yeah, right. Exactly. What are some things that leap out at you as real highlights, besides the fact that it's now trimmed down by 4 pages?
Yeah, we talked about that, the idea that it's less prescriptive, that there's a focus on the one team, one product. We already talked about that as well. Trying to think, we mentioned the product goal. Oh, I know. One thing that came up was the idea of self-organizing versus now it's called self-managing.
Okay.
And so the idea of self-organizing, if I can get this right from kind of the gestalt of what everyone was saying today, self-organizing was having to do with we see the software as a system and we need to self-organize around how to address aspects of the system, but I lost it.
You lost it.
I can't remember what they said. I'll have to go back and watch the video.
Yeah.
But again, that's kind of a subtle change, I think, and that's going to be not an obvious change. And I know you asked me what are some obvious things that I was thinking of, but that was something that's kind of like the little piece of sand in my shoe that it's going to annoy me every now and then until I figure it out.
Right, until you can knock that out. Well,
yeah. And I think it goes back to the idea of one team now. Now that you don't have a separate kind of product owner and a Scrum Master, but rather we're one Scrum team, how can the team be self-managing?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to chew on that a little bit.
I think it's Christopher Avery, and I'm not sure on this either, I'd have to look it up, that distinguishes between self-organizing, self-managing. Oh, you're going to go find your Chris Avery book. Look at you with all these things. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that self-management actually is a broader scope of autonomy. Self-organization is actually scoped in just a little bit. So there's an expansion, I guess, of autonomy at that Scrum team level.
Yeah, Chris Avery's Responsibility Process is a good book I'd recommend for that. I'm going to have to reread his book. It's been a couple of years since I read that. And I think that might be a good starting place.
Yeah. Yeah, and try to get centered again on it. I don't have it available. I'd have to really go off screen to get this book, Adaptive Action by Glenda Yang. She, Human Systems Dynamic, and she talks about containers, differences, and exchanges are the the constraints for self-organization. I don't know if she says much about self-management though. That definition of self-organization to me would fit pretty well to also self-management, right? There's containers like you, me, us, and then there's some differences, and we look for differences that make a difference, and then the way that we're exchanging information. So that feels like some dials that we can dial up or down autonomy on a team.
Yeah. I'd be excited if I was on a Scrum team that was actually reading the Scrum guide.
Yeah.
I know a lot of Scrum teams in real life and practice probably haven't looked at the Scrum guide maybe more than once.
Or if ever.
But I think that this gives people more, what's the word? But it's that autonomy, that ability to self-manage. Okay, what do we want Scrum to become? The idea that we are creating, what did they say? I had it before. It's purposefully incomplete, the Scrum guide, and it's then built by the team. And I think that because it's more incomplete, if that makes sense, slimmed down, less prescriptive, now it gives the team more kind of freedom. The container, I think, for ideation of how are we going to run our Scrum team is a lot bigger. There's less boundary around it.
Yeah.
I'm just making words up right now.
Oh, well, I'm picking up what you're putting down. These words make sense to me. I totally buy it. And again, this is, I think, from Jeff Patton's interactions with Alistair Coburn. He always talks about the Scrum framework is intentionally incomplete. And I was really thrilled to see that kind of language come out, that it is actually a framework. Some assembly is required and batteries aren't included. And so with that self-management, trying to figure out how to actually make it work, because you know what, it doesn't. And especially if you take things away from it. And I think they are very clear with that. You should just try it as is. Use this empirical system as is to figure out how to start to really create your own methods, processes, practices, and reflect on all of that, reflect on the product, and figure out your own way forward.
Yeah, and that's another thing that they said in their revisions, is that it's an overall simplification of the language for a wider audience. So not only the people who are currently using Scrum, but the people who can potentially use Scrum, the language has been simplified overall, reduced, things like that, so that it makes it easier for people to adopt ultimately.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yes.
I'm sorry, finish your thought. I have an off-the-wall question for you.
Okay. What was my thought? I don't know. Go off the wall then.
Off the wall it goes. So, Aaron, one of the things that I love about you is the history that you have, that you bring with you when you teach your classes. History of, I think you probably have a more comprehensive list of Schwaber-isms than anyone else I know.
Okay. Yeah, he's some good ones.
One thing that I was hoping to get more of today in the Ken and Jeff session was more of Ken's own personality, and hear him kind of share more of those Ken Schwaber-isms, right? But so off the wall, what do you think about? What are some of the more interesting things that maybe Ken or Jeff? I don't want to disclude Jeff. I want to include him as well. But what are some of the things that they've said over the years that you like to repeat in your classes?
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. There's something about Ken and the way that he speaks. It just, I guess my ears pick up. And so I remember some of that stuff a little bit more. Jeff is very polished in his presentation, and I find myself just taking tons of notes. but like these little catchphrases really seem to come out of Ken's mouth more than Jeff's. Scrum's like your mother-in-law, constantly pointing out your shortcomings. It's a little provocative, but I like that one. That was one of his sayings in one, I think, a keynote at a Scrum gathering. Scrum guarantees you failure in 30 days or less. That's another real good one.
Who came up with the idea that Scrum is simple but not easy? Was that either Ken or Jeff?
That would sound a little bit more like Jeff, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the nice thing about this stuff, even though it's 25 years old, and some of the originals that started it are older, but they're still around. So we can go ask if they happen to remember. Did you say that, Jeff? Who was that? What was that saying? But yeah, that does sound a little bit more like Jeff. I'm also
when I knew I was going to be live streaming with you tonight, I figured I'd ask you these questions because, I've heard some good ones over the years. I just haven't heard them firsthand or maybe even secondhand in most cases. Yeah. So you never know, playing the telephone game or the, what'd you say?
Well, I remember another one. And this is apropos to the new revision of the Scrum Guide, is when the first one dropped in 2010, they interviewed Ken and asked him about these values. This is actually with the Scrum Guide, the first time these ever appeared anywhere. And so whoever was interviewing him was asking, can you foresee in a new version of the Scrum Guide changing any of the Scrum values? He says, you know what? As a matter of fact, I can. We should double the font size on courage. I like that one a lot too.
Yeah. The first time I saw the Scrum values was in the book that Ken wrote with Mike Beadle.
Oh, really? Are they in there?
Yes. And it's on my shelf. It's just blending in. Here it is. Yeah, right here, tucked away into like the very last chapter is where they talk about the Scrum values. So.
Oh, okay, my bad.
Yeah, there it is.
Oh, how about that? Okay. Well.
Which one did he want to double the font size on? Was it one of them or all of them?
One of them, courage.
Courage. Yeah. Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it is. Good. Absolutely. You have to be pretty courageous to really do this well. I feel like.
And that goes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead.
No, what do you feel like? You feel like what?
I feel like, I don't know. Well, I feel a little hot on the collar right now.
What I tell my Scrum classes when they take my certified Scrum training, certified Scrum Master class, is it's not an easy job being a Scrum Master, working on a Scrum team. Mm-hmm. It's not an easy job, and it takes courage. It does a lot of courage.
I know what I was thinking.
Because as a Scrum Master, and this is something that one of the panelists said, was as a Scrum Master, you're kind of that glue between the Scrum team and leadership. And oftentimes you've got to have those difficult conversations, not only with your team, but with leadership or people on other teams or whoever it might be. And that takes a lot of courage.
Indeed, it does. That's right. Yeah. Exactly. And there's some ways that you can maybe, if you can't show that much courage, you can show a little bit of courage. If you don't have, as a product owner, for example, enough courage to say, no, that is never getting on my product backlog. You can say, well, thanks. Yeah, it's on the product backlog, but where is it? It's so far down, I can't even find it right now. So that's
the most important word of the product owner.
Right? That's right. But I also think it takes a lot of courage because in a more sequential gated process, my success is handing it over to the next step in the process. And then whoop, I'm done. And that's a little bit, I think, a safer place to be, that my success and my value is on doing my job. It takes a lot more courage, I think, to work with a whole team and really focused on a sprint goal and a product goal and trying to work together and even growing a little bit outside of your own specialty to learn some other things. I mean, that's some courage to just stand up and say, I'm going to make sure our customers get the best product possible.
So many examples of how courage can be turned up to, if not 11, at least turned up higher, yeah. Which is saying, I don't know. Oh my gosh. Whether you're the most senior person on the team or the person fresh out of college to come and join the team,
yeah,
being able to say, I don't know. And once you have a team that's courageous, but like safe in their relations with each other, they understand how to work together, and you can have people say, I don't know. Now you're cooking with gas, because now you see where the gaps are and where the blind spots are that we have on the team. And as we say about Scrum, it doesn't fix your problems, doesn't solve your problems, but it exposes them. It shines a light on them.
Yep. Exactly.
That's what Scrum's all about, like the empirical process, that transparency, the inspection and adaptation that just underlies all of it. And it takes courage. That's a good one. Yeah, thanks for that one.
You betcha. Transparency, you're reminding me, I was looking through that and talking about the things that aren't transparent are hard to inspect. And that felt like, well, yeah, duh. I mean, if you can't see it, how could you look at something you can't see? I had a little bit of a hard time with that part of the Scrum guide. Am I making sense?
Transparency and openness.
Yeah. People misconstrue that. Well, don't misconstrue, but when I ask, like, what are the 3 legs of the Scrum's empirical process, they always respond with openness. Or when I ask what's one of the values, they respond with transparency. I think those are very close to each other, because we are trying to take away the opacity and make things much clearer and transparent. Actually, I think it was Ev Williams from Twitter said, you want to know the difference between transparency and openness? Transparency is a window, openness is a door. And I also like that idea too, with the value of openness, and with all the meetings or events being open in Scrum, it is an open door. People can come in, work with the Scrum team, collaborate with them. It's not just like sitting there eating popcorn, looking at them through the window. You can actually get in there with them. And I like that.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I may use that for my classes.
Yeah.
What are the values in extreme programming?
Oh gosh, courage, I think, is one. Oh my goodness sakes. I can't believe you're putting me on the spot here. Courage, right? That's one.
Yeah, courage. I know. The thing is, like, commitment. The Agile values, which are the value pairs, the Scrum values, the XP values, and we can go on through Crystal and some of the other Agile frameworks, etc.
But I'm just curious, did Kent Beck sign that book?
Did Kent sign it?
Yeah.
No, there's no signature in this one.
I can one up you. I'll go grab mine.
I'm not that in. No.
Yeah, I got to decide mine, but I can't remember all the.
But I do like this drawing from Kent and the team. Is the values? Sorry, let's see if we can get that there.
Almost.
The values, the principles rather of XP are the bridge between values and the practices. So.
Yeah. That also
metaphors for us.
Yeah, that also reminds me about the kind of the values iceberg, that above the water line are behaviors and actions, and below the water line are actually the values that support what's above it.
Yeah.
I like that. A lot of that stuff is somewhat subsurface and influences so much, right? And also the bottom of the iceberg is usually like 90% is below the water line. So there's so much down there that actually affects what we can see. And so making things transparent, it's ridiculously hard to do and absolutely necessary for that ability to inspect and adapt. But that's just like the 10% that you can really see.
One thing that you had said in your classes, and again, I've co-trained with you, I've watched you teach your classes, is the idea of values, and maybe you can articulate this better, but I love how you said it back then, and it kind of made me think of it for the last year or two,
oh, wow.
is values shouldn't be kind of pushed on somebody, but rather, and I think going back to the Beadle and Schwaber book, when they talk about values, they said these are values that we observed coming from these high performing teams. So when I talk to my, people who take my classes about values, I kind of say the same thing. You don't insist or push these values on teams, but rather you try to cultivate, you try to create a space, the container in which these values can emerge. I love what you want to do.
Yeah, that's great. I really like that. Yeah, I think I riff
from you.
Well, I should write that down. That was pretty good.
Respect, courage are both common to Scrum and XP. Respect and courage. The other one's communication, simplicity, and feedback.
Oh, yes, of course.
Good values to have.
Absolutely.
But again, don't push them on me. Let them emerge.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. The real intrinsic values rather than the co-opted values, right? I can cloak myself in something that looks like courage, but it might really be more about just kind of like being really big and strutting. Is it really courage, or am I just being gregarious? And it's.
So I've got one more question for you before we leave. Going back to the Scrum Guide, the idea that sprints, in the past, a sprint was a time box, which makes me think that, if we meet the sprint goal early, can we end the sprint early? Kind of a thing, right? But now they said a sprint is a fixed length.
Okay.
Not only is a sprint fixed length, but they also reduced, and I'd have to go back and look at this because I'm going off the top of my head, they reduced the idea of sprint terminations, like terminating a sprint early.
Yeah. The cancel a sprint, that's out.
Canceling a sprint. Is that still in the Scrum Guide, or I think they just reduced the language of it. I'm not sure if the word termination is still in there. It makes me think of Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, "I'll be back," and then he never comes back.
That's pretty funny. Let's look. We can look at this, right? I got this here somewhere. I get you kind of small over to the side. We'll be small over here. Okay, and then move the chat out of the way. So let's just search for cancel. Yeah, could be canceled. The sprint goal becomes obsolete. Actually, it was just right there on the screen for us. So that's
right, so it's still in there.
Now, what's interesting?
I think one of the panelists was saying there's a reduced focus on the idea of terminating a sprint.
Yeah, looks that way, and it doesn't say. It doesn't look like it talks about the product owner is the only one, right? It just says it can be if. Oh no, it does. Only the product owner has the authority. Okay.
And so anyone that's listening to us or watching us right now, you can still find the previous version of the Scrum Guide. If you go up to the top, you can under the web, you can see the PDF version or the HTML version. I think when you choose the HTML version, there's a link. It says, right there where it says web version, there should be like a link up above, that says which version do you want to see or something.
History.
Well, anyway, in there somewhere, trust me, I found it earlier. You can still see the 2017 version as well as the new 2020 version.
Well, there you go.
Right there. You see it right there under official versions.
Yeah.
English, they've got both versions there.
Yeah, and that was what I clicked on as PDF versions. I think the web version. Oh, there it is right there too. Okay, great. That's excellent. Good to know. I did want to say that with the simplification, not only about working on for different things like a service organization or whatever else, I was also wondering if the language simplification makes it easier to translate in other languages and isn't so like Anglo-American centric. I wonder if they worked with some people to figure out how to make a better language, in the English version so that it translates better. Did they at all talk about anything like that? Because I know people.
I didn't hear anything like that. I will say though that it was a Zoom webinar or a Zoom call today for 3 hours. And so, if you've been on Zoom, and who hasn't these days, right? You can be in the chat, or you can have a Q&A.
Yep.
And a large number of questions were asking, is this going to be available offline? Can we watch this video later? I think the second most popular question, though, was having to do with translations. When's it going to be ready in German? When's it going to be ready in Spanish? When's it going to be ready in Arabic and all that? They were asking a lot of those questions, but I didn't hear any answer to that.
I gotcha. Well,
if you do go to YouTube, there's a few people out there who have been already kind of giving their, I don't know if it's a review or just recitation, reciting kind of their translation of the Scrum Guide in their native language. So you can find those on YouTube anyway.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, and I know Mike Vistos already has the audio out for English.
Yeah, he's been great with that.
Yeah. Well, Victor, thank you so much for joining, and Bob and Ms. Frescari Molina. I'm glad you joined us on Zoom, and anybody out there in YouTube, thanks so much for watching. I hope you picked up something useful that will help improve your quality of work life and your ability to use a Scrum framework. Until next time, we can talk more about servant leadership and some other things too. Thank you, Victor.
Thanks, Aaron.
All right.
See you next time.
All right. Until then.